A new double feature, Somerset Maugham. French Joe. It was Captain Bartlett who told me of him. I do not think that many people have been to Thursday Island. It is in the Torres Straits, and is so called because it was discovered on a Thursday by Captain Cook. I went there since they told me in Sydney that it was the last place God ever made. They said there was nothing to see and warned me that I should probably get my throat cut. I had come up from Sydney in a Japanese tramp, and they put me ashore in a small boat. It was the middle of the night, and there was not a soul on the jetty. One of the sailors who landed my kit told me that if I turned to the left, I should presently come to a 2-story building, and this was the hotel. The boat pushed off, and I was left alone. I do not much like being separated from my luggage, but I like still less to pass the night on a jetty and sleep on hard stones, so I shouldered a bag and set out. It was pitch dark. I seemed to walk much more than a few hundred yards, which they had spoken of, and was afraid I had missed my way, but at last saw dimly a building which seemed to be important enough to suggest that it might be the hotel. No light showed, but my eyes by now were pretty well accustomed to the darkness, and I found a door. I struck a match, but could see no bell. I knocked. There was no reply. I knocked again, with my stick, as loudly as I could. Then a window above me was opened, and a woman's voice asked me what I wanted. "I've just got off the Shikamaru," I said. "Can I have a room?" "I'll come down." I waited a little longer, and the door was opened by a woman in a red flannel dressing gown. Her hair was hanging over her shoulders in long black wisps. In her hand, she held a paraffin lamp. She greeted me warmly, a little stoutish woman, with keen eyes and a nose suspiciously red, and bade me come in. She took me upstairs and showed me a room. "Now, you sit down," she said, "and I'll make up the bed, before you can say Jack Robinson. What will you have? A drop of whiskey would do you good, I should think. You won't want to be washing at this time of night. I'll bring you a towel in the morning." And while she made the bed, she asked me who I was and what I had come to Thursday Island for. She could see I wasn't a seafaring man. All the pilots came to this hotel and had done for 20 years, and she didn't know what business could have brought me. I wasn't that fellow as was coming to inspect the customs, was I? She'd heard they were sending someone from Sydney. I asked her if there were any pilots staying there then. Yes, there was one, Captain Bartlett. Did I know him? A queer fish he was, and no mistake. Hadn't got a hair on his head, but the way he could put his liquor away, well, it was a caution. There, the bed was ready, and she expected I'd sleep like a top, and one thing she could say was, the sheets were clean. She lit the end of a candle and bade me good night. Captain Bartlett certainly was a queer fish, but he is of no moment to my present purpose. I made his acquaintance at dinner next day. Before I left Thursday Island, I had eaten turtle soup so often that I have ceased to look upon it as a luxury, and it was because in the course of conversation I mentioned that I spoke French that he asked me to go and see French Joe. It'll be a treat to the old fellow to talk his own lingo for a bit. He's 93, you know. For the last 2 years, not because he was ill, but because he was old and destitute, he had lived in the hospital, and it was here that I visited him. He was lying in bed, in flannel pajamas, much too large for him, a little shriveled old man with vivacious eyes, a short white beard, and bushy black eyebrows. He was glad to speak French with me, which he spoke with the marked accent of his native isle, for he was a Corsican. But he had dwelt so many years among English-speaking people that he no longer spoke his mother tongue with accuracy. He used English words as though they were French, making verbs of them with French terminations. He talked very quickly with broad gestures, and his voice for the most part was clear and strong. But now and then it seemed suddenly to fade away, so that it sounded as though he spoke from the grave. The hushed and hollow sound gave me an eerie feeling. Indeed, I could not look upon him still as of this world. His real name was Joseph de Paoli. He was a nobleman and a gentleman. He was of the same family as the general we have all read of in Boswell's Johnson, but he showed no interest in his famous ancestor. "We have had so many generals in our family," he said. "You know, of course, that Napoleon Bonaparte was a connection of mine. No, I have never read Boswell. I have not read books. I have lived. He had entered the French army in 1851, 75 years ago. It is terrifying. As a lieutenant of artillery, like my cousin Bonaparte, he said, he had fought the Russians in the Crimea, and as a captain, the Prussians in 1870. He showed me a scar on his bald pate from an Uhlan's lance, and then with a dramatic gesture told how he had thrust his sword in the Uhlan's body with such violence that he could not withdraw it. The Uhlan fell dead, and the sword remained in the body. But the empire perished, and he joined the communists. For 6 weeks, he fought against the government troops under Monsieur Thiers. To me, Thiers is but a shadowy figure, and it was startling, and even a trifle comic, to hear French Joe speak with passionate hatred of a man who has been dead for half a century. His voice rose into a shrill scream as he repeated the insults, oriental in their imagery, which in the council he had flung at the head of this mediocre statesman. French Joe was tried and sentenced to 5 years in New Caledonia. "They should have shot me," he said, "but dirty cowards, they dared not." Then came the long journey in a sailing vessel, and the antipodes and his wrath flamed out again when he spoke of the indignity thrust upon him, a political prisoner, when they herded him with vulgar criminals. The ship put in at Melbourne, and one of the officers, a fellow Corsican, enabled him to slip over the side. He swam ashore, and taking his friend's advice, went straight to the police station. No one there could understand a word he said, but an interpreter was sent for, his dripping papers were examined, and he was told that so long as he did not set foot on a French ship, he was safe. "Freedom," he cried to me, "freedom." Then came a long series of adventures. He cooked, taught French, swept streets, worked in the gold mines, tramped, starved, and at last found his way to New Guinea. Here, he underwent the most astonishing of his experiences for drifting into the savage interior, and they are cannibals there still. After 100 desperate adventures and hairbreadth escapes, he made himself king of some wild tribe. "Look at me, my friend," he said. "I who lie here on a hospital bed, the object of charity, have been monarch of all I surveyed. Yes, it is something to say that I have been a king." But eventually, he came into collision with the British, and his sovereignty passed from him. He fled the country and started life once more. It is clear that he was a fellow of resource, for eventually he came to own a fleet of pearling luggers on Thursday Island. It looked as though at last he had reached a haven of peace, and, an elderly man now, he looked forward to a prosperous and even respectable old age. A hurricane destroyed his boats, and ruin fell upon him. He never recovered. He was too old to make a fresh start, and since then had earned as best he could a precarious livelihood, till at last, beaten, he had accepted the hospital's kindly shelter. "But why did you not go back to France or Corsica?" "An amnesty was granted to the communists a quarter of a century ago. What are France and Corsica to me after 50 years? A cousin of mine seized my land. We Corsicans never forget and never forgive. If I had gone back, I should have had to kill him. He had his children. Funny old French Joe, smiled the hospital nurse who stood at the end of the bed. At all events, you have had a fine life, I said. Never, never. I have had a frightful life. Misfortune has followed me wherever I turned my steps, and look at me now. I am rotten, fit for nothing but the grave. I thank God that I had no children to inherit the curse that is upon me. Why, Joe, I thought you didn't believe in God, said the nurse. It is true. I am a skeptic. I have never seen a sign that there is in the scheme of things an intelligent purpose. If the universe is the contrivance of some being, that being can only be a criminal imbecile. He shrugged his shoulders. Anyhow, I have not got much longer in this filthy world, and then I shall go and see for myself what is the real truth of the whole business. The nurse told me it was time to leave the old man, and I took his hand to bid him farewell. I asked him if there was anything I could do for him. I want nothing, he said. I only want to die. His black, shining eyes twinkled. But meanwhile, I should be grateful for a packet of cigarettes. German Harry. I was in Thursday Island, and I wanted very much to go to New Guinea. Now the only way in which I could do this was by getting a pearling lugger to take me across the Arafura Sea. The pearl fishery at that time was in a bad way, and a flock of neat little craft lay anchored in the harbour. I found a skipper with nothing much to do. The journey to Morocco and back could hardly take him less than a month, and with him I made the necessary arrangements. He engaged 4 Torres Straits Islanders as crew. The boat was but 19 tons, and we ransacked the local store for canned goods. A day or two before I sailed, a man who owned a number of pearlers came to me and asked whether on my way I would stop at the island of Tribucket and leave a sack of flour, another of rice, and some magazines for the hermit who lived there. I pricked up my ears. It appeared that the hermit had lived by himself on this remote and tiny island for 30 years, and when opportunity occurred, provisions were sent to him by kindly souls. He said that he was a Dane, but in the Torres Straits he was known as German Harry. His history went back a long way. 30 years before, he had been an able seaman on a sailing vessel that was wrecked in those treacherous waters. 2 boats managed to get away and eventually hit upon the desert island of Tribucket. This is well out of the line of traffic, and it was 3 years before any ship sighted the castaways. 16 men had landed on the island, but when at last a schooner, driven from her course by stress of weather, put in for shelter, no more than 5 were left. When the storm abated, the skipper took 4 of these on board and eventually landed them at Sydney. German Harry refused to go with them. He said that during those 3 years he had seen such terrible things that he had a horror of his fellow men and wished never to live with them again. He would say, no more. He was absolutely fixed in his determination to stay, entirely by himself, in that lonely place. Though now and then opportunity had been given him to leave, he had never taken it. A strange man, and a strange story. I learned more about him as we sailed across the desolate sea. The Torres Straits are peppered with islands, and at night we anchored on the lee of one or other of them. Of late, new pearling grounds have been discovered near Tribucket, and in the autumn pearlers, visiting it now and then, have given German Harry various necessities so that he has been able to make himself sufficiently comfortable. They bring him papers, bags of flour and rice, and canned meats. He has a whaleboat and used to go fishing in it, but now he is no longer strong enough to manage its unwieldy bulk. There is abundant pearl shell on the reef that surrounds his island, and this he used to collect and sell to the pearlers for tobacco, and sometimes he found a good pearl for which he got a considerable sum. It is believed that he has, hidden away somewhere, a collection of magnificent pearls. During the war, no pearlers came out, and for years he never saw a living soul. For all he knew, a terrible epidemic had killed off the entire human race, and he was the only man alive. He was asked later what he thought. "I thought something had happened," he said. He ran out of matches and was afraid that his fire would go out, so he only slept in snatches, putting wood on his fire from time to time all day and all night. He came to the end of his provisions and lived on chickens, fish, and coconuts. Sometimes he got a turtle. During the last 4 months of the year, there may be 2 or 3 pearlers about, and not infrequently, after the day's work, they will row in and spend an evening with him. They try to make him drunk, and then they ask him what happened during those 3 years after the 2 boatloads came to the island. How was it that 16 landed, and at the end of that time, only 5 were left? He never says a word. Drunk or sober, he is equally silent on that subject, and if they insist, grows angry and leaves them. I forget if it was 4 or 5 days before we sighted the hermit's little kingdom. We had been driven by bad weather to take shelter, and had spent a couple of days at an island on the way. Tree Bucket is a low island, perhaps a mile round, covered with coconuts, just raised above the level of the sea, and surrounded by a reef so that it can be approached only on one side. There is no opening in the reef, and the lugger had to anchor a mile from the shore. We got into a dinghy with the provisions. It was a stiff pull, and even within the reef, the sea was choppy. I saw the little hut, sheltered by trees, in which German Harry lived, and as we approached, he sauntered down slowly to the water's edge. We shouted a greeting, but he did not answer. He was a man of over 70, very bald, hatchet-faced, with a grey beard, and he walked with a roll so that you could never have taken him for anything but a seafaring man. His sunburn made his blue eyes look very pale, and they were surrounded by wrinkles, as though for long years he had spent interminable hours scanning the vacant sea. He wore dungarees and a singlet, patched but neat and clean. The house to which he presently led us consisted of a single room with a roof of corrugated iron. There was a bed in it, some rough stools which he himself had made, a table, and his various household utensils. Under a tree in front of it was a table and a bench. Behind was an enclosed run for his chickens. I cannot say that he was pleased to see us. He accepted our gifts as a right, without thanks, and grumbled a little because something or other he needed had not been brought. He was silent and morose. He was not interested in the news we had to give him, for the outside world was no concern of his. The only thing he cared about was his island. He looked upon it with a jealous proprietary right. He called it my health resort, and he feared that the coconuts that covered it would tempt some enterprising trader. He looked at me with suspicion. He was somberly curious to know what I was doing in these seas. He used words with difficulty, talking to himself rather than to us, and it was a little uncanny to hear him mumble away as though we were not there. But he was moved when my skipper told him that an old man of his own age, whom he had known for a long time, was dead. "Old Charlie dead? That's too bad. Old Charlie dead." He repeated it over and over again. I asked him if he read. "Not much," he answered indifferently. He seemed to be occupied with nothing but his food, his dogs, and his chickens. If what they tell us in books were true, his long communion with nature and the sea should have taught him many subtle secrets. It hadn't. He was a savage. He was nothing but a narrow, ignorant, and cantankerous seafaring man. As I looked at the wrinkled, mean old face, I wondered what was the story of those 3 dreadful years that had made him welcome this long imprisonment. I sought to see behind those pale blue eyes of his what secrets they were that he would carry to his grave. And then I foresaw the end. One day, a pearl fisher would land on the island, and German Harry would not be waiting for him, silent and suspicious, at the water's edge. He would go up to the hut, and there, lying on the bed, unrecognizable, he would see all that remained of what had once been a man. Perhaps then he would hunt high and low for the great mass of pearls that has haunted the fancy of so many adventurers. But I do not believe he would find it. German Harry would have seen to it that none should discover the treasure, and the pearls would rot in their hiding place. Then the pearl fisher would go back into his dinghy, and the island once more be deserted of man.